His hand clamped down on her wrist, the smirk on his face twisting into a snarl. "You're not going anywhere." For men were about to learn a brutal lesson. The woman they cornered wasn't just a target, she was a weapon. The onyx room was a sanctuary of hushed tones and old money. Low-hanging amber lights cast long shadows across tables draped in heavy white linen, and the air hummed with the gentle clinking of crystal and the murmur of discreet conversations. It was the kind of place where power was communicated not through volume, but through the effortless confidence of its patrons. At a secluded corner booth, Anya Petrova sat alone. At 30, she possessed a stillness that was both captivating and unnerving. It wasn't the practiced poise of a socialite, but the deep, centered calm of someone who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, forged into something new. Tonight was a quiet anniversary, 1 year since she had traded the arid dust of Helmand province for the polished concrete of civilian life. 1 year since she had hung up the uniform of a Navy SEAL. She wore a slate-gray jumpsuit, a single piece of fabric that was both utilitarian and undeniably elegant. It fit her toned frame perfectly, hinting at the disciplined strength beneath without flaunting it. Her hair, the color of spun gold, was pulled back in a severe, practical knot at the nape of her neck. But it was her eyes that held the real story, an icy, piercing blue that seemed to see not just what was there, but what could be. They scanned the room with an economy of movement, cataloging exits, sightlines, and potential threats with a subconscious ease born from years of survival. To the other diners, she was an enigma. A high-powered corporate lawyer, perhaps, or a surgeon decompressing after a long shift. They saw the expensive, understated black titanium watch on her wrist and the way she held her glass of Pinot Noir, but they missed the crucial details. They didn't see how her booth gave her a panoramic view of both the entrance and the kitchen doors. They didn't notice that her feet were planted flat on the floor, perfectly balanced, or that her purse was positioned on the seat beside her at an angle that would allow for a swift, unimpeded draw of its contents. Old habits didn't just die hard, they became a part of your DNA. She was celebrating, in her own quiet way. A full year of no pre-dawn alarms for forced marches, no intelligence briefings in windowless rooms, no the gut-wrenching weight of a fallen comrade's gear. It was supposed to be a peaceful milestone, a silent toast to the woman she was trying to become. And then, the sanctuary's peace was shattered. For men burst through the heavy oak doors, a tidal wave of noise, entitlement, and expensive cologne. They were loud, brash, and moved with the swagger of men who believed the world was their personal playground. Leading the pack was Caleb Vance, a man whose tailored suit couldn't quite conceal the brutish set of his shoulders or the predatory glint in his eyes. He was flanked by his 3 acolytes, Leo, Finn, and Marco. They were younger, leaner, but mirrored their leader's arrogance. They were Wall Street sharks, fresh from a kill, celebrating a hostile takeover that had gutted a smaller company and padded their bonuses. Their laughter was a harsh, grating sound that sliced through the restaurant's refined ambience, causing heads to turn and conversations to falter. The hostess, a young woman with a practiced smile, approached them cautiously. "A table for 4, gentlemen." Caleb's eyes swept the room, dismissing the carefully arranged tables and the other patrons with a contemptuous sneer. His gaze landed on Anya, sitting alone in her corner booth. He saw a solitary woman, an easy target for his evening's entertainment. He ignored the hostess completely. "No, not a table," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He pointed a thick finger directly at Anya. "We'll take that booth. And the company that comes with it." The hostess's smile faltered. "Sir, that booth is occupied. I have a lovely table for you by the window." "I don't think you heard me," Caleb cut her off, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. He didn't even look at her, his eyes still locked on Anya. He started walking, and his crew fell in behind him, a phalanx of tailored aggression. The other diners shifted uncomfortably, their quiet conversations dying out as they sensed the impending confrontation. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Anya had registered them the moment they entered. Her senses, honed by years in environments where a single miscalculation meant death, had flagged them as a threat cluster. For males, alpha leader, intoxicated, high on a recent victory, seeking a target to assert dominance. It was a familiar pattern, one she'd seen play out in dusty back-alley markets and hostile foreign compounds. The context was different, but the primal dynamics were exactly the same. She didn't move. She didn't tense up. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, using the reflection in the curved glass to track their approach without making direct eye contact. She ran through her protocols, the mental checklist now a deeply ingrained instinct. Environment, public, high-density civilian presence. Threat level, initially verbal, high probability of physical escalation. Rules of engagement, civilian standard. Primary objective, de-escalate and egress. They reached her table, casting a collective shadow over her. Caleb leaned over, planting his hands on the polished wood, invading her personal space. The cloying scent of his cologne, mixed with whiskey, was suffocating. "Well, look what we have here," he purred, his voice a slimy caress. "All alone on a Friday night? That's a damn shame." Leo and Finn flanked the sides of the booth, while Marco stood behind Caleb, effectively boxing her in. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to make a target feel trapped and powerless. Anya slowly raised her head, her icy blue eyes meeting Caleb's. Her expression was perfectly neutral, a blank canvas devoid of fear or anger. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm and even, each word precisely enunciated. "I believe you've mistaken my table for yours." Caleb chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "No mistake, sweetheart. We just thought you looked lonely. A beautiful woman like you shouldn't be eating by herself." He began to slide into the seat opposite her. "I appreciate the thought," Anya replied, her tone unwavering, "but I prefer it this way. I'm sure your server can find you another spot." Her politeness, her utter lack of intimidation, seemed to infuriate him. It was a rejection, a denial of the power he believed he held over everyone in the room. His manufactured charm evaporated, replaced by raw, petulant anger. "You think you're too good for us," he hissed, his face contorting into an ugly sneer. "Sitting here in your fancy little outfit, looking down your nose at everyone. You think you're some kind of queen." The atmosphere in the Onyx room had grown cold. A family at a nearby table quietly gathered their children closer. The jazz trio in the corner seemed to have lost their rhythm, their music faltering into a nervous silence. Anya's mind was a whirlwind of calculations. He's escalating. Ego is bruised. He needs to reassert control through humiliation or force. She had to get out. This wasn't a mission. There was no objective worth holding this ground for. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," she said, her voice still soft, but with an underlying edge of steel. She reached for her purse. "I was just about to leave. The table is all yours." It was the wrong move. Her attempt to retreat was perceived as a final act of defiance. And that's when Caleb made his critical error. His hand shot across the table, faster than she expected, and clamped down on her wrist. His fingers were thick and strong, his grip a vice of muscle and bone. He squeezed, his knuckles turning white, the pressure sharp and painful. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You'll leave when we say you can leave." The moment his skin touched hers, a switch flipped deep inside Anya. For a decade, that kind of unsolicited, aggressive contact was a clear signal, a line crossed, a threat declared. The part of her that had dragged a wounded teammate through 3 kilometers of enemy territory, the part that had held her breath for an hour in near-freezing water waiting for a target, screamed at her to act. Neutralize the threat. End it. Now. But another voice, the one she had been cultivating for the past year, urged restraint. This wasn't a war zone. These weren't enemy combatants. They were just arrogant, drunk men in a restaurant. The consequences of her training, unleashed here, would be life-altering. She was trying to be a civilian. She had to give the civilian way a chance. Her icy blue eyes didn't waver. Her breathing remained steady. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping to a low, chillingly calm register. "You have 3 seconds to remove your hand before I remove it for you." Caleb just laughed, a loud, braying sound meant for the entire room to hear. "Ooh, feisty. I like that." He tightened his grip, deliberately grinding his thumb into the delicate bones of her wrist. "What are you gonna do? Scream? Call the manager?" He looked around at the other diners, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Anyone want to help this poor, lonely lady?" The room was silent, a collective paralysis of fear and uncertainty. No one moved. No one spoke. Except for one person. From the table next to them, a young man stood up. He couldn't have been more than 25, with a slim build, glasses, and the slightly nervous energy of a tech professional on a date. He was clearly out of his depth, but his jaw was set with determination. "Hey," he said, his voice trembling slightly but clear. "She asked you to let her go. You should listen." Caleb turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing with disbelief that someone so insignificant would dare to challenge him. "I'm sorry," he said with mock politeness. "What did you just say, nerd?" The young man swallowed hard but held his ground. "I said, leave her alone. Before this gets ugly." The pack turned its attention. The challenge, however feeble, had provided a new target for their aggression. Leo and Finn, who had been standing guard, moved toward the young man with predatory smiles. "Or what?" Leo sneered. "You gonna write a bad Yelp review?" Before the young man could respond, Finn shoved him hard in the chest. It wasn't a punch, but it was violent and sudden. The man stumbled backward, crashing into his own table. His date cried out as glasses and silverware clattered to the floor. He landed in a heap, stunned and humiliated. And that was it. The catalyst. Anya watched the innocent bystander fall. He had done the right thing. He had shown courage when no one else would. And he was punished for it. In that instant, all debate within her ceased. The line had been crossed, not against her, but against a civilian who had tried to help. The rules of engagement had just changed. The escalation had failed. Now, there was only one option left. The shift in Anya was imperceptible to the onlookers, but for the 4 men, it was as if the temperature in the room had dropped by 20 degrees. The woman they were tormenting was gone. In her place was something else, something cold, ancient, and terrifyingly efficient. Second 1 to 3, her free hand, which had been resting on the table, moved in a blur. It wasn't a strike, but a precise, clinical motion. Her thumb and forefinger found a specific nerve cluster on the back of Caleb's hand. She applied pressure. It wasn't a squeeze, it was a surgical command to his nervous system. Caleb's brain screamed, and his hand shot open as if electrocuted. He let out a choked, high-pitched yelp, snatching his hand back like a child who touched a hot stove. Second 4 to 7, as Caleb recoiled, Leo, seeing his leader hurt, turned to face her. He never saw the elbow that struck him. Anya pivoted in her seat, a fluid, economical movement, and drove her elbow directly into his solar plexus. The impact was perfectly placed, knocking the air from his lungs in a silent, agonizing rush. Leo's eyes went wide with shock and pain, and he folded like a cheap suit, collapsing to the plush carpet without a sound. Second 8 to 12, Marco, the third man, lunged forward, his arms flailing in a clumsy, rage-fueled swing. It was the attack of an amateur, wide and predictable. Anya didn't even stand up fully. She leaned away from the punch, her hand darting out to the bread basket on her table. She snatched a thick, crusty piece of artisan sourdough, and in one continuous motion, stuffed it into Marco's open, shouting mouth. The hard crust jammed against his teeth, silencing him mid-yell. Simultaneously, her leg swept out from under the table, hooking his ankle. His forward momentum did the rest. He went down hard, landing flat on his back, his eyes wide with confusion, still gagging on the bread. Second 13 to 20, Caleb, recovering from the initial shock, let out a bellow of pure fury. His face was a mask of crimson rage. "You be!" He charged, head down, like a wounded bull. It was a fatal mistake. Anya rose from her seat, a ghost of fluid motion. She didn't meet his charge head-on. Instead, she used his momentum against him. As he barreled past, she grabbed the sleeve of his expensive suit, pivoted on the ball of her foot, and spun him. He was a toy in her hands. His trajectory changed, and he was no longer charging at her, but at the solid oak corner of the table. The sound was sickening, a wet, heavy thud as his face connected with the wood. He crumpled to the ground and lay still, a low groan escaping his lips. Silence. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the onyx room. Forks were frozen mid-air. A wine glass, dropped in the initial chaos, lay shattered on the floor. The only sounds were the whimpering of Leo, still struggling to breathe, and Marco's muffled chewing. 20 seconds. For men, neutralized. No wasted motion. No collateral damage, save for a few bruised egos and a piece of violated sourdough. Anya Petrova stood in the center of the wreckage, not even breathing heavily. She calmly straightened the sleeve of her jumpsuit, picked up her purse, and surveyed the room. Her icy blue eyes held no malice, no triumph. Only a quiet, resolute finality. The tableau held for a long, stretched-out moment. 40 pairs of eyes were fixed on Anya, a mixture of awe, fear, and utter disbelief on every face. The young tech professional, still on the floor, stared up at her as if she were a mythical creature. His date had her hands clasped over her mouth, her eyes wide. Anya walked back to her table, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She opened her purse, took out 3 crisp $50 bills, and placed them neatly on the table. "For my dinner, and for the disturbance," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick silence. "My apologies." Just as she turned to leave, the front doors of the restaurant opened again. A man walked in, his wife on his arm. He was tall, well-built, with a weary but sharp intelligence in his eyes. He was Detective Marcus Thorne, off-duty and hoping for a quiet anniversary dinner. What he walked into was the aftermath of a storm. His cop's brain processed the scene in an instant. 4 men down, 1 woman standing, a room full of shell-shocked witnesses. His initial assumption was the obvious one: the woman was the victim, running on adrenaline, lucky to have survived an assault. He moved forward, his hand instinctively going to where his badge would be if he were on duty. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice a calm, authoritative rumble. "Everyone stay seated." Then he looked closer. He saw the way the men were positioned. Leo was curled in the fetal position, a classic sign of a solar plexus strike. Marco was on his back, a textbook leg sweep. Caleb had a deep gash on his forehead, consistent with a high-impact collision with a stationary object. These weren't the messy, flailing injuries of a typical bar fight. They were clean, precise, and brutally efficient. These were takedowns. His gaze snapped back to Anya. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't in shock. She wasn't even flustered. She looked like someone who had just finished a routine task and was waiting for the next one. The discrepancy between her calm demeanor and the chaos around her set off every alarm in his head. "I'm going to need to see some ID," he said, his tone shifting from concerned citizen to professional lawman. He pulled out his badge and held it up. "Detective Thorne, homicide." Anya simply nodded, reached into her purse, and handed him her driver's license. He took it, his eyes scanning the name. Anya Petrova. The name meant nothing to him. But something about her bearing, the unnerving stillness in her eyes, made him pull out his department-issued phone. He ran the name through a secure database. He expected to see priors, maybe a history of assault. The result that came back made him freeze. His thumb hovered over the screen as he read, his expression shifting from suspicion to shock, and then to a deep, profound respect. He looked up from his phone, then back at Anya, seeing her for the first time. The screen displayed a heavily redacted service record. United States Navy. Special Warfare Development Group. SEAL Team. Multiple combat deployments. Citations for valor. And at the top of the list, one award that made the breath catch in his throat, the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat, awarded for her actions during a hostage rescue operation in Helmand Province. The entire restaurant was watching, listening. Detective Thorne slowly lowered his phone. He handed the license back to her, his movements stiff with a respect he usually reserved for fallen heroes. "Ms. Petrova," he said, his voice now quiet and deferential. "My apologies for troubling you." He turned to the stunned restaurant manager who had just scurried over. "Call for paramedics for these 4. And get statements from everyone. But she," he nodded toward Anya, "is free to go." Anya gave him a single, brief nod of acknowledgement. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the Onyx room, disappearing into the night as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind a scene of carnage, a room full of legends, and a profound lesson in underestimation. The story of what happened at the Onyx room didn't stay within its walls. In the age of smartphones, it couldn't. Within hours, a dozen different videos, shaky and shot from various angles, hit the internet. One compilation, titled 4 Wall Street Bullies vs. One Woman. They picked the wrong one, went viral. It rocketed past 10 million views in 2 days, then 20 million in a week. The fallout for Caleb Vance and his crew was swift and brutal. They were charged with assault and public disturbance. Caleb, as the instigator, received a 6-month jail sentence. His high-flying finance career imploded overnight. He lost his job, his reputation, and the respect he had demanded so forcefully. He became a walking punchline, the man who tried to bully a Navy SEAL and got his face rearranged by a table. But the more significant impact was in the comments section of the viral video. It became an unexpected forum for respect and shared experience. Thousands of veterans, particularly women, shared their own stories of being dismissed, underestimated, and provoked. They spoke of the constant burden of having to prove themselves, of their restraint being mistaken for weakness. The top comment, with over 100,000 likes, read simply, "This is why you treat every single person with respect. You never, ever know who you're sitting next to." Anya Petrova, true to her nature, vanished from the public eye. She never gave an interview, never made a statement. But her actions created ripples. 3 months after the incident, a new scholarship fund appeared at a national level, the Sentinel Fund. Funded anonymously, its mission was to provide financial support and mentorship for women pursuing careers in traditionally male-dominated fields like special operations, intelligence, and emergency services. 6 months later, in a quiet, underserved neighborhood, a new kind of gym opened its doors. It was called the Aegis Initiative. It was a non-profit, offering free self-defense, situational awareness, and confidence-building courses to women and children. The founder and head instructor remained anonymous to the public, known to her students only as Anya. She taught them how to carry themselves, how to recognize a threat, and how to de-escalate. But she also taught them how to fight. Not for sport, but for survival. During one class, a young student, her face beaded with sweat after a difficult drill, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "How do you stay so calm? How do you do what you do?" Anya paused, a rare, small smile touching her lips. She looked at the faces of the women in the room, strong, determined, learning their own power. "Violence," she said, her voice quiet but resonant, "is always the last resort. It's the ugly, final option when everything else has failed." She met the student's gaze, her icy blue eyes holding a lifetime of experience. But if that moment ever comes, your job is to be the most dangerous person in the room for exactly as long as it takes to end the threat. No longer. No less. The student nodded, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. The lesson wasn't just about fighting. It was about control, discipline, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are. What did you think of Anya's actions? Let us know in the comments below, and always remember to treat everyone with respect. You never know their story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.